Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another of my In Conversations. And today I am joined by the inimitable, I think that's the way to say it, Steve Blomer. How are you, Steve?
I'm okay, thanks, Richard.
Brilliant. And today we're going to discuss. What are we going to discuss, Steve?
We're going to discuss Mitre Square. Surprisingly enough, my next book after the Inside Bucks Row one is A Death in Mitre Square, Catherine Eddowes, and then an analysis of murder, which should hopefully be out not this Christmas, but next Christmas.
So that's for Christmas 2026.
It's only about 3.5 years to 4 years behind schedule at present.
That's minor. That's minor. It's
Yeah.
So some authors take a lifetime to come up with another one. So
I know, but it's the same format as the first one, though. It's an ebook. It's semi-interactive, hundreds of links, bigger than Inside Bucks Row, which is 730 pages plus. So it's larger than that.
Fantastic. So that'll keep us occupied. We'll have a few interviews from that then. So.
Yes, we will. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, shall we set the scene? So we're going back to it's September the 30th, 1888. There's been a murder over in Blomer Street, and that's the murder of, we now know, it's the murder of Elizabeth Stride. That body's been found at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the killers then escaped into the streets around Commercial Road, Blomer Street way. The alarm has been raised by Louis Diemschutz at 1 o'clock in the morning. Police is now converging on Blomer Street, the people searching for the murderer, and yet almost under their noses, he crisscrosses into the City of London, or makes his way into the City of London, and he commits another audacious murder on the eastern fringe of the City of London, and that murder is in Mitre Square. So shall we just go back to what we know about Mitre Square just before the murder? There's a sighting, isn't there, by three men, and they sight Catherine Eddowes talking to a man outside Mitre Square.
Well, to be absolutely precise about it, they cite somebody who is probably Catherine Eddowes. It's not 100% certain, but it's probably her with a gentleman from the passageway which led from Duke's Street into Mitre Square itself. They've just come out of the Imperial Club, and they're walking south down, and they see there's three men. There's the vendor, Levy, and Harris, and they see two people on opposite side of the street talking, chatting, and they remember it. Levy in particular seems to be quite thinking they're bad people, sort of thing, is the impression he gives. But they see two people there, and then 10 minutes later, roughly, a body's found in the square.
There's a fetch. I mean, obviously, like you say, we're not certain it is Catherine Eddowes they saw, because Lavender, who's the man who gave the description, he didn't see her face, did he? He only saw her clothes, so he identified her from her clothing.
Yeah. But I mean, the arguments for it being them is that nobody else comes forward to say that was us. So that's a good argument. And the balance of probability is that it probably was Catherine and her killer. But I wouldn't put 100% on it. I'd say about 85% certain myself. Always allow for the possibility of there being somebody else.
That's it. This is the one subject where there's no certainty. I would say the one certainty about Jack the Ripper is nothing is certain. So they've gone into the square then. So let's presume it was Catherine Eddowes. They've gone into the southwest corner of the square, and it's there that 1:45, Police Constable Watkins comes into Mitre Square. He shines his lamp into the corner, into that particular corner, and he discovers the body of Catherine Eddowes. Now, that must have been quite a quick find. He must have been there almost straight after the murder's been committed.
One assumes so. I mean, we can go into this. It would appear that he's there within 2 or 3 minutes, but it could be longer, and we're going on to that later, I think. But looks like if we take everything at face value, and that everyone's done all the police officers have done what they've said they've done, rather than not quite telling the truth, then yeah, he's there a couple of minutes after another PC Harvey, comes down the same passageway which the two people were seen at the start of, and goes up to the square, doesn't go into the square, and he says he doesn't see anything. Now, he bases his time, he hasn't got a watch on him at all, so he bases his time by backtracking for when he passed the post office in Aldgate High Street. And he backtracks, so it was roughly this time. Watkins, on the other hand, apparently must have a watch on him because he gives a precise time for actually finding the body.
And then Watkins goes into the warehouse. Is it the Killian Tong warehouse, isn't he? And he goes into the warehouse. He knows that there's a night watchman who's a retired police officer, that he's actually on duty as night watchman there. And he goes in and tells, for God's sake, mate, come quick, takes him out to the square. And that man then sees the body. He's the one who then runs off, blowing his whistle to raise the alarm, isn't he?
Yeah, he runs into Mitre Street and blows his whistle, and then you get some workmen who are in Mitre Street coming up, and you also get some police officers coming in via Mitre Street. Now, that gentleman is George Morris. What's interesting is that every other night of the week, he and Watkins have a cup of tea, apart from that night. He says that the door was open about 2 or 3 minutes before Watkins turned up and knocked on the door. He'd opened the door slightly. Some people have questioned whether or not, and this is why I say we're assuming he finds it just after the person has fled. Some people have questioned whether or not perhaps Watkins actually did go and have a drink with him that night and didn't quite tell the truth. There's no evidence to support that, but some people have suggested it, which would give us a longer window, and that might suggest that the couple seen by Lavender were not Catherine and her killer. But again, it's just one of those suggestions which people do from time to time make.
And of course, there's that quote, isn't there, from Morris, which just where he talks about how he'd only been saying that he wished the murderer would come round there so he could give him a good doing or a good seeing to, and he's been there. And he said, effectively, he's been here, and I was quite unaware of it.
Well, the interesting bit, of course, is he says that he opens his door very slightly, it's cracked open before Watkins comes, which must suggest that the door's open when the killer's actually in the square. That's the really weird bit.
So with Watkins then, so do you think the killer was in the square when Watkins was in the square?
No, I think he'd already left. He may well have been there when Harvey walked towards the square. And again, people question, did Harvey actually go the whole way along the passage up to the square or not? There's no way of knowing. It might be that he didn't go the whole way along. People have suggested this many times over the years. And we just don't know. I mean, if you just sort of look down this passageway, didn't actually cover the square itself. He walked all the way down to where the passageway stopped as it entered the square, and then he'd come back again. So it's possible that he didn't look in. But even if he says he did, and we know that the light in the corner, the closest one to where the murder took place, wasn't working properly, and he said he didn't notice anything, which is quite possible. If the killer was still there and heard him walking down the passageway, all you've got to do is just keep absolutely still, and you're not going to be seen in the shadows of the darkness.
And of course, he wasn't. The police officer wasn't looking for anything. It's not like every police officer was walking around thinking, "Oh, there's going to be a body somewhere in the shadows." He's just looking. He's just on his beat.
Yeah, particularly as it was in a city police, not the Metropolitan Police. They hadn't had a murder at this stage in the city area. This was the first and the only one that's definitely in the city area.
That's an interesting point, because what this does, this murder in particular, brings a second police force into the investigation. They haven't been involved. Well, they have been involved in the investigation, but they haven't been officially involved. But they've got patrols out, haven't they? For example, there's plainclothes detectives from the City of London Police on the boundary, and several of them, is it Daniel House and several others, they're over by St. Botolph's Church when Watkins discovers the body.
Yeah, they're all around, they're all taking place, but they're not going to be absolutely looking for Jack the Ripper probably as much as they would do if they were in the Metropolitan Police area. They're going to be on the lookout, but they're not actually stopping every couple and checking every couple.
So you have got quite a few police officers, plainclothes and uniformed, in the area on that eastern fringe of the City of London.
Yeah, and then of course we ought to go on with that. We also have an account by a guy called Blenkinsop, who's a watchman in the Orange Market, which just to the north of Mitre Square, and he actually says in a press report that he is approached by a well-dressed man who asks him if has he seen anyone pass, and he says, "I think I may have done, but I wasn't paying too much attention." And it's assumed that that is a police officer. There's questions about the time, because the time which Blenkinsop says seems to be too early for the body to be discovered. But again, these times are all over the place, so it's not that unlikely. And some people have suggested that could be Howes, actually, who's coming up to talk to him there after the murder, so investigating.
So, yeah, so because that's what House does, doesn't he? One of the first things House does is he heads out into the East End. He goes into the East End of London and stops everybody he meets and starts questioning them, saying, "Have you seen anything?" Or have you, basically makes them give an account of themselves as well.
I think one thing we should paint a picture for people here is that there are 3 entrances and exits from Mitre Square. There's the main one which comes off of Duke Street. There's then one which leads that comes in from the southeast, so to speak. There's one which then heads up north, almost directly across up from that, which heads out into the Orange Market. And then there's a third one which goes out via Mitre Street on the far side. But that is opposite the first passageway in. So there's 3 separate entrances.
And of course, what we can say with certainty on this night, certainly at first, I mean, we can't say it at the later stage, but we do know that when the killer fled the square, the first flight took him into the East End of London. And of course, we know that because of what was discovered in Goulston Street.
Yeah. Now this is where we get interesting. Which way did he go? Now, if we for a moment disregard the theory which has been put forward by Trevor Marriott, that in fact the apron was dropped earlier and not after, was dropped before the murder and not after the murder, and that the apron part was used as a sanitary towel by Catherine Eddowes. If we ignore that, then yes, we know that the killer headed back towards Goulston Street. What we don't know is how he got there. And that's what I think we're going to look at in a few seconds.
Because the thing that amazes me about this particular murder, or the thing that intrigues me, is you do have a lot of police activity in the immediate vicinity of Mitre Square. And you do have, as I say, the plainclothes patrols are being orchestrated around St. Botolph's. Aldgate High Street's quite busy as well. Even at that time of the morning, Aldgate High Street was quite busy. You had several pubs and places along there. So you've got all these police officers as well. Watkins discovers the body at 1:45. It can't be that long after the murder's taken place. And then he raises the alarm, and police are converging on Mitre Square from quite a big section of the area. They're coming into the, and yet somehow the killer slips through them.
Yes.
And if we do believe that the apron was dropped in the doorway, then he gets through them and manages to get into Goulston Street. But the bizarre thing about that is that House, and I think Long as well, said they'd been there at 40 or so minutes before the apron was discovered, and the doorway had been empty at that time. So it means he must have hung around the vicinity.
Well, I think one thing that's argued is that they weren't actually looking that closely for the apron and they just missed it. That's suggested by some people, and it was there and they just didn't notice it that time. I think it would depend on which way they were walking down Goulston Street compared to the angle the apron might have been at. If you were walking in one direction, you might not have seen it if it was to one side of the doorway inside, sort of thing. So it's possible it was missed. But we do have a gap there. We have a gap we have a gap of some substantial number of minutes there between anything being seen and the murder taking place. Now, I say we have the 3 exits. What gets a little confusing now is the names of these passages. Back in 1888, the passage which led up to St James's Place, the Orange Market, was actually called St James's Passage. This name was then later given to the passageway which came off of Duke Street. They changed the names around. So it gets a bit confusing. So the 3 ways that he could have left. He could have left out onto Duke Street to start off with. So he's going back the way that Harvey would have been coming up to it. He then gets to Duke Street and he has an option. He can either then go, basically turn south and head towards Aldgate High Street and walk along that way. And as you say, that's quite a busy way. And then head back up Goulston Street, drop the Apron off. Or he could cut across the road, use Little Duke Street, and then come out into Houndsditch. He could then, it's suggested, go along Stony Lane. There's a problem here, though. Stony Lane may not have been open at Houndsditch in 1888. There was road works going on and demolition work going on. We've got maps from before and we've got maps from afterwards, but we've got nothing which actually shows what it was like in September of 1888. So if he couldn't enter it, Stony Lane, he then has to use Gravel Lane slightly further south along Houndsditch, and he can then cut back up onto Stony Lane and then out into Middlesex Street and then across to either New Goulston or Wentworth and then drop it off at the buildings in Goulston Street.
Can I just make a point at this point, Steve, about, because you talked about crossing Middlesex Street. Maybe we should make clear that that's the point. As he crosses Middle Street, we should make the point that as he crosses Middlesex Street, he crosses out of the jurisdiction of the City of London Police and crosses into the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Police.
Yes. And it should, I mean, it'd be remiss of us not to mention that roughly where he crosses, a few yards out, is actually the address of one of the suspects, Jacob Levy, who actually lives in Middlesex Street. So it'd be remiss not to mention that. Would also be remiss not to mention that Levy had family living at the back of the building in Goulston Street.
Well, we've mentioned it, so we have not been remiss, Steve. We have not been remiss. we have done our duty.
Yes,
I believe it's called due diligence.
If he heads out of what was then St James's Passage, going north into the Orange Market, he can do basically he can do the same sort of thing. He could go up into Little Duke Street, go across along Stony Lane or Gravel Lane and come out that way. So that's the quickest route. But again, it's unless he actually knows who's going to be around, it's quite a risk. He's possibly already been seen in Duke Street itself. There may be people around. You then have via Mitre Street, so he goes out to the entrance to Mitre Street, and he then has a choice of going either north or south, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes. So those are those routes. We've then got another route, which so we've got now we know that Watkins comes in from Mitre Street, and he's walking down Mitre Street and turns into Mitre Square. If the killer went out that way, it means he must almost pass him at some stage, or be seen by him at least. And of course, we do have the famous comment given by Macnaghten about a city police constable who saw someone near to Mitre Square. Now, it's often been assumed that's Harvey, but it could equally be Watkins. And there are actually press stories from just after the time which suggested it was Watkins. But again, these are press stories, so we shouldn't really put too much emphasis on those. But again, it would be remiss of us not to mention it.
Do you think the police had an idea of, or obviously perhaps not the correct idea, but do you think the police had an idea of the type of person they were looking for, and that's how he managed to slip past them, because they didn't see him as the sort of person who would commit the murder or who they were looking for?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, Richard. It's possible they were looking for someone who looked like a murderer. But what does a murderer look like? We assume then that the killer, if he was seen, didn't look like a murderer and wasn't covered in blood. But it's dark, and blood on dark material looks dark anyway, so you're probably never going to notice it. But I mean, if he comes out, if he does exit via Mitre Street, he can either then turn south and go again along Aldgate High Street and turn up Goulston, or he's got the option of heading in the other direction. Now, then he's got several options. He can, again, head out towards Little Duke Street and do Stony Lane, Gravel Lane, or he can take another option, which is to go further north. Now, this has been suggested by several people over the years. Gavin Bromley, who wrote some very good articles back in Ripperologist well over a decade ago. By Mick Priestley in his book, One Autumn in Whitechapel. Again, suggesting that the killer first went slightly north and then came back down south. So that they looped round. In a recent article which I wrote for Ripperologist number 173, I looked at the escape routes from Mitre Square, the possible escape routes, and I concurred with Mick Priestley and Gavin Bromley that going north was a good suggestion. I'm not saying it's the route he took, but it's a good suggestion. And I actually went a stage further than them. I suggested he went even further north by back streets and crossed into St Mary Axe, and then crossed the road much further north, and then came back down south again. Because the problem is that we don't know which way the killer entered Goulston Street. Did he come from the south, New Goulston Street, or from Aldgate High Street, or did he come in from Wentworth, coming down from the south or straight across, so to speak? And we don't know. And people will pick a direction depending often on their suspect. So Mick Priestley was proposing Albert Backett, and he lives south of the Whitechapel Road, so obviously he's heading south. I, as everyone know, am a firm member of the Anderson suspect camp. Therefore, I'm looking for a killer heading south, perhaps. Gavin Bromley, though, didn't seem to have a suspect, and he suggested the same sort of route.
And of course, there is one more suspect. Dare we use the L word, Steve?
We could use the L word because it is suggested that Mitre Square would be on the direct route from the old home that Lechmere lived at, near to Blomer Street, up to his workplace at Pickford's. Well, it's not a direct route. It's not the most direct route. It's a route. And it doesn't go, the most direct route doesn't actually go past Mitre Square. But yeah, he could do if he wanted to. I've heard it suggested that the reason why the apron may have been found later, was that he actually then went from Mitre Square into Pickford's and came back again. I've heard these stories. There's no evidence for any of this. It's just like everything else, like Levy and everything else. There's suggestions by people who are making suspect theories.
But if he's escaping Mitre Square and he's heading to Doveton Street, it is a logical route to go to Goulston Street, Wentworth Street, second half of Wentworth Street, over into Old Montague Street, and then we've picked up at the end of Old Montague Street, we've picked up the route where he met P.C. Misen.
Of course, that assumes that he drops the apron off heading up towards Wentworth Street, not coming down from it. And it's quite possible that, in fact, it's the other direction. He's going in the other direction, whoever the killer was. Of course, Jacob Levy fits very well, because Jacob Levy only lives a street away in Middlesex Street. So literally, he would drop it off and come back home again.
And we do know for certain it was Catherine Eddowes' apron, don't we? We do know it was her apron in the doorway.
Yes. It was matched at the inquest. The seams, it had been repaired and the seams actually matched. Unfortunately, neither part of the apron exist. But we can go back to Howes now. He says he was informed of the murder. He actually says at 2 minutes to 2 he's informed of the murder. He then says he heads off towards Goulston Street. And on the way, he stops at least 2 people in Wentworth Street and speaks to them, and they are cleared and allowed to go on. But we know that there are people around, so because he says he stops 2 people in Wentworth Street.
And of course, the other thing, you were mentioning Aldgate High Street earlier, you had Butcher's Row on Aldgate High Street.
Yes.
Anyway, we are going into Sunday, so would Butcher's Row have been active on a Saturday night, Sunday morning? Or?
Well, there were slaughterhouses behind it, so yes, I think there would have been. There were slaughterhouses there. Slaughterhouses tended to work at nights. Um, we don't know. I've never seen any evidence that they didn't work on Saturday nights, Sunday mornings. I've never seen any evidence of that at all. So one assumes there were people around, but the whole area was fairly busy. So this is why I have suggested that the killer loops up and comes back round because he's going away from the site of the murder and coming back towards it. So as long as he's not stopped on the way away from it, he's unlikely to be questioned seriously if he's walking back towards it.
So why do you think he's taken the apron? Do you think he's cut himself, or do you think he just wants to clean his hands up?
Well, we have at least three suggestions, don't we? The first one is that he's well before. First one, he used it to clean his hands. The second one is that he's used it to carry away organs. But the staining on the apron, as it's described, doesn't seem to match what you get from organs being carried away. It's just in one corner, the blood staining. The other option, as you say, is he's cut himself and he's used it to wrap up a cut. Or there's the other option that is deliberately taken to try and link to show police that he's done the murder. And that's been suggested as well. And then we get on to the graffiti and everything else. So was the graffiti written by the killer? And again, that's one of those which people, it's probably a 50-50 split.
Just to clarify that, when you talk about the graffiti, this is the message that was scrawled on chalk. When Alfred Long, the police officer, finds the apron, he stands up and scrawled on chalk on an inner door jamb. So it's not massive big graffiti, but there's graffiti over a few rows of bricks, which reads, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." This is the graffiti you're referring to.
Yes, the famous Goulston Street graffito, as it's referred to. I've never quite understood why it's called graffito rather than graffiti, but that's another matter.
I think that was Martin Fido who got me into that. Martin's argument was that it was graffito is singular, whereas graffiti is plural.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I've never understood that, but I accept that. Whether the killer wrote it, that's one of those which divides ripperologists. Today, I noticed there's a poll actually on one of the Facebook groups asking people, do you think it was by the killer or not? And if the result seems to be split equally, which is where I am. A few years ago, I was definitely in the camp that the writing probably wasn't by the killer, it was just there. These days, I'm more 45, 55 in favour of it not being by the killer, but I could easily swing to 55, 45 by it being in favour of being written by the killer. I really am sitting on the fence on this one now. My view changed some years. My view changed mainly when Tracy and Neil published their book, Jacob the Ripper, and putting out that there's family living behind. And the interesting bit, of course, was that the actual graffito was written on a wall which was very close to the footprint of an old property that had been owned by the other butcher who'd had Jacob actually arrested and put into prison, which led to his first breakdown a couple of years beforehand. And I could see how perhaps there could be a connection that way there. So it opened my mind more to possibilities, shall we say.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you go down certain routes, and your mind starts ticking over and thinking all sorts of things. But let's go back to Mitre Square. So basically we've got to. If we do believe that Lavender and the two others, Harris and Levy, saw the killer with Catherine Eddowes outside Mitre Square, we know that PC Watkins finds the body at 1:45 in the morning. So therefore, we've got that window maybe of 10 or so minutes for the man to have gone into the square with her, carried out the murder, and then escape from the square, and then get into the East End of London. But as I say, we've got that time gap. This is the thing that's always puzzled me, is that time gap between the apron being left in the doorway, if, as House and Long both say, it wasn't there at 2:20, is it 2:50 that Long finds it? It's
there actually is a gap. It would be a difference between one part of his round and the next part of his of what one part. So 250 sounds about right for a half hour beat.
Yeah, so it's 250, 255 is when he finds out. Yeah. But of course, I mean, that could mean one of two things. It could mean that he's in the area and he's actually watching what the police are doing. So he might be hiding out in an area. Or, as you say, he might have gone on a more torturous, let me say, I can't even say it, on a more torturous route around the area to actually get to that spot. So perhaps he's dodging the police, dipping in and out of alleyways, or even going out of the area and then coming back into the area. Is that possibilities?
If he went by the quickest route, the most direct route, which is either by Gravel Lane or Stony Lane, it's less than 600 yards away. The distance, the walk is less than 600 yards. That's at around just under 100 yards per minute, 3 miles per hour, 6-7 minutes, and he's there. He's basically at Goulston Street. If he goes the more circular routes, the longer routes, then we're looking at 15-20 minutes perhaps, depending on the exact route he takes, but definitely over 10 minutes longer. So either they have missed the apron, or he's been somewhere first. He's been somewhere and dropped. He's been somewhere and he's had a little spot where he's been able to sit and contemplate what he's done. If it was Levy, he's got into a family house, perhaps. If it's somebody else, I mean, Lechmere have suggested that he goes towards Pickford's and comes back. If it's somebody else, then perhaps they've got family or somewhere else that they can pop in as a bolt hole. That's what we're looking for a bolt hole, basically, they can go into. And we don't know enough about any of the suspects to know if they did have bolt holes close by, apart from Jake and Levy, obviously.
And am I correct in remembering that wasn't the local post office robbed that night as well?
Yes, the post office was robbed that night. The post office, which was used by Harvey to set his time by. Yeah, that was robbed that night as well. I mean, it was fairly heavily covered. The beats in the city police beats were only about 15 minutes approximately in length, rather than the approximate 30 minutes in the Metropolitan Police area. It was a small area. The beats, the two police officers would have been in Mitre Square within 5, 6, 7 minutes of each other. So the window is quite small for the killer to actually get someone in there, kill someone, and get out. Which is why I tend to think that the killer was probably still there when Harvey walked down. If he walked down, the killer was probably still in the square.
Yeah. Were there any empty properties in the immediate vicinity that he could have been hiding out in?
Yes, there's a couple of houses off the square weren't actually occupied, as far as I'm aware at the time. So in theory, he could have been in one of those houses. There were loads of other properties on the streets leading off. He could have been in one of those.
I suppose the only thing about that, though, is he would have had to have come out because the police have closed the square off, haven't they?
Yeah.
So that we've got those press images of the police completely stopping the square the next day, and they've done it already by that time. So I suppose if he did that, he'd still have to come out with the police about, and that might attract attention.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's gone by the time Watkins gets into the square. I think he is gone. I think there's a real possibility that Watkins may have seen him and passed him. But not realised, just seen someone. It might not have been actually going into the square. It may have been in Mitre Street, just see him walking up Mitre Street or walking down Mitre Street as Watkins entered Mitre Street. Might just have seen him from the distance. Doesn't need to have actually passed him.
Yeah, and of course, when he's gone into Goulston Street, of course, that whole area, Middlesex Street, Goulston Street, Wentworth Street, that's the scene of the Petticoat Lane Market, which is going to take place at 6 o'clock on the Sunday morning. From 5 o'clock on the Sunday morning. So are the stall holders, we're talking, 3 hours before, are stall holders starting to come out at that time of the day, do you think?
Probably not when it's found, but the reason they remove it, the graffiti, apparently is because the area was starting to lighten up. The area was starting to get busy, and the excuse was used. if people see it, it could cause a riot or cause problems with the local community.
That premises, that property was almost exclusively lived in. That was Jewish people lived in that property.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it was found, there probably wasn't anyone around, but by the time everyone got there and they were looking at it and looking to get a photograph taken, perhaps, by that stage, I think their people were starting to actually appear and set up stalls, probably around about 5 o'clock in the morning, I would have thought, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, starting to appear, starting to set stuff up.
So we know he goes from Mitre Square. We know that he goes somewhere via Goulston Street. We know that because the apron's dropped in the door.
But where he goes, we've got no idea. We don't know if he's going south or north or east.
And nothing else was found that morning.
No. We can probably rule out him heading west unless we go down the theory I mentioned earlier of the apron being dropped beforehand and not actually being cut off by the killer, but being dropped by Catherine herself earlier after she was released from the police station. So unless we go down that route, which I'm not inclined to do, I think we can rule out the killer heading west back into the city of London. So he's either going north into Spitalfields or parts of Whitechapel. He's going east into Whitechapel, or he's going south down towards St George in the east.
Yeah. Of course, you can't go too far over towards St George in the east because of the Blomer Street murder, because there's a lot of police. Yeah. The other thing to remember is there's been the other murder of Elizabeth Stride, and the Metropolitan Police are busy around Commercial Road and that area around there.
Yeah. So if he's heading back in that direction, he'd have to take a big loop probably and come in from the south if he was heading back in that direction towards St George in the east. He wouldn't be able to go directly to St George in the east. He'd have to do a loop round again, which again suggests somebody who might know the area well. But again, it could well be he's heading back towards Whitechapel or back towards Spitalfields. It could be going back towards Flower and Dean Street or Fall Street. We just don't know. Because we don't know where he enters Goulston Street from, we don't know which direction he's going in, and all of them are possible.
It's this wonderful thing, because this is the night when we get the only real clue that's left behind, which, of course, is the apron in the doorway, not the graffito on the wall. It's the apron in the doorway is the major clue. And I think it's about the only clue that the police actually had to go on. But it's like so many things with the Jack the Ripper case. It tells us quite a lot, and then suddenly it tells us nothing.
Yeah. If people go over onto Casebook, there are a couple of really good long posts on there about escape routes from Mitre Square. So people might want to go and have a look at those.
Yes, I'll put the links in the description down below.
Yeah. There are a couple of long ones on there. One of them's about 34 pages long, I think, of suggestions on the escape routes. We're back again, of course, though, to the killer possibly being seen by a police officer. Now, we've got various accounts. We've got the McNaughton account. You've got Stephen White's account, which is often portrayed as being Mitre Square, but doesn't seem to really fit Mitre Square. I actually think what we've got here is a story, it's a kernel of truth buried away somewhere that someone was seen close to, but not at a murder site. I think that's what we've got. And I think it could be Harvey, it could be Watkins, it could be a completely separate police officer who's never mentioned, who saw someone and later on something clicked. I personally think that perhaps Watkins may have seen somebody.
Not Amos Simpson then? So.
No, not Amos Simpson, who wasn't even in the area. He was helping out. I mean, that's the whole point. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about police being patrols. Police have been pulled in from North London to cover the area. So people like Amos Simpson have been called in from outside of London to actually cover the bits that the people who've been called in were covering.
Do we know that Amos Simpson, again, let me, maybe I should clarify that. Amos Simpson is the police officer who supposedly took the shawl away from Mitre Square. And this is the shawl that's been in the news an awful lot this year because supposedly they found DNA evidence on it, which wasn't DNA evidence. Well, it was DNA, but it wasn't any real DNA evidence. So it hasn't solved the mystery. But I'm being a bit facetious there by bringing up Amos Simpson.
Yeah. No, he wasn't in the area as far as we know. He definitely wasn't in Mitre Square. There's no record of him being anywhere near Mitre Square that night. So
we don't even know that he was one of the police officers drafted into the area at the time.
no, he was probably drafted in to another area to cover for the officers who were drafted into the area to the actual Whitechapel area to cover that. He was probably covering those who were covering. If you understand what I mean.
So, do you think with Jack the Ripper, a lot of people mention the fact that with the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, that he was interviewed by the police several times. Do you think the police possibly or probably did interview Jack the Ripper on several occasions and just not realise they were interviewing Jack the Ripper?
On the balance of probabilities, yes. I think it's very likely that he was spoken to at least once, probably more than once. Yeah. What else can one say? I think he was spoken to.
Which brings me back to this point, because as I say, did the police have, I've got a recollection, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I've got a recollection of somebody seeing somebody do something, possibly who's with one of the local women, I don't know, but someone stops a policeman and says, look, that man could be the murderer. And the policeman takes a look and says, oh no, he's not the sort of person we're looking for.
Yeah, there's lots of stories like this. They may well have had an idea, but I think they weren't advanced enough to know what a killer looked like. They may have had a preconceived idea. They could have had a preconceived idea that he was. I mean, there was two main ideas going around, wasn't there? One that he was a Jewish person. The other was that he was a doctor or a toff sort of thing. So either looking for someone who's well dressed or someone who looks like a nutter, basically. One would have thought. Yeah. And what does a homicidal maniac look like? I mean, Peter Sutcliffe, as we going back to Peter Sutcliffe, he wasn't recognised as a killer, even though he was spoken to so many times. I think it's probably the same with Jack the Ripper. If he was spoken to, he just appeared normal.
Well, just like us, Steve, we could be homicidal maniacs and nobody realises it.
Shh! Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone, Richard.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered everything there, haven't we, Steve?
I think so. I mean, I'll just go on to say that in the next edition of Ripperologist, there's a follow-up article which looks at the possible routes the killer could have taken to get to Mitre Square, assuming that he did commit the murder in Berners Street, and also looking at the possible routes which Catherine may have taken from the police station to Mitre Square and why she didn't go home.
Yeah. Do you think that she did have a pre? Well, it has been suggested she had a pre-arranged appointment with him. Of course, that would be all, but that's completely it is completely impossible because, of course, she didn't know what time she was going to be released from. Well, she didn't. Firstly, she didn't know she was going to be arrested, and secondly, she didn't know what time she was going to be released at. So that goes out of the window. But I have seen suggestions, and I can't remember. Again, my memory's going, Steve. It's my age, but I can't remember. I have seen suggestions that she had a pre-arranged meeting with her killer.
Yes. Now, for this to work, it's suggested. Well, for this to work, first of all, I think we have to discount her killer being the same killer as Stride. It's just too tight. For the killer to make sure he's going to get there and meet her, it's too tight. And to know what time she'll be released. Now, I've heard people suggest, but yeah, she wasn't really drunk. She sobered up too quickly. And the whole thing was just to get her off the streets quickly so that she could be safe out the way and come back to meet him at a later date. That's a conspiracy, which I just don't put any weight in at all. There's another suggestion, isn't there, that in fact she was being followed by the police and she was actually involved with the police to try and catch the killer, and somehow they lost her on her way back from the police station towards Mitre Square and lost her. And I've heard some people try and tie that in with the Blinkinsop story. The police were looking for someone because they'd lost her. Again, I think it's probably too far-fetched. I think she just, for some reason, she went towards Mitre Square. probably because she told John Kelly that she was going to get money that day, which obviously there's no way she was going to get money because her daughter, she's claimed she was going to get it from, had actually moved. And she may have well just gone back to try and get hold of some money that night. But to be fair, of all the canonical 5 victims, she's the one who's least likely to actually have resorted to casual prostitution. She's the one there's least evidence for.
Has anyone ever suggested the night watchman as a possible suspect?
I think George Morris has been suggested before now. I think virtually everyone has. I mean, we've definitely had Watkins suggested in the past. I think we've had Harvey suggested in the past. There was even a book a couple of years ago which suggested that the killers were several of the 3 gentlemen who left the Imperial Club. There was a book out about 6 years ago which suggested that it was those gentlemen who were actually her killer, and they didn't actually see anyone at all. They just killed her.
It's all so intriguing, isn't it, Steve? It's these discussions. I mean, the thing I do think is great about it is that it does make people start to really look into the history of the area, get to know the area. I think that's the great thing about it. And I think there's one thing you said interestingly about casebook.org, about going in and looking at the possible escape routes from Mitre Square. Because I think a lot of people don't, whether it's laziness, whether there's just too much information out there now. But I always think that people should go back to the sources. Don't take someone's word for it. There's lots of people who come up and say, well, I've done it. And everyone, oh, yes, he's a genius. He knows who it was. And take that. Go back to the sources and come up with your own theories. That's what we should all do.
Yeah. Because sometimes people will say, oh, but I found the source and it's this newspaper and this day. Check what the source is. Is it a report from the inquest, like a court report? Or is it just a press story? Press stories are less reliable than the court reports. We've got cases where two completely different versions appear in the same newspaper of the events. One is the press report gives a completely false impression to what the court report says, what the inquest report says. So you've got to look at them and judge them for how reliable they are. And people don't do that. There's also people tend to go by some of the really old books, which haven't been updated in many, many years. And no disrespect to the authors of those books, but the research wasn't available when they wrote those books 20, 30, 40 years ago, which is available now. So there are mistakes in those books and people have to recognise that.
And I think the other thing is we've all got access now to so much information via Ancestry, via the British Newspaper Archive. So many records are online. And it really is. And what I think about a lot of people is that it's a great thing to do your own research because you might bring something to the case that everybody else has missed. You might spot something and think, oh, or you might dig out something that people have just overlooked.
Oh, I agree entirely. I mean, there's always new stuff coming forward. Most of it doesn't appear on the surface to be important or highly relevant. But just because it doesn't appear to be doesn't mean it's not. You've got to look into it and something may lead to something else, which actually does develop ideas.
Well, I think we've covered everything there, Steve. So again, I could talk to you all night. It's a fascinating thing, our conversations, because as I say, we're just bouncing ideas, chatting away. But it's been great talking to you, Steve. I'm going to put those links to casebook.org down there. And again, I'll put another link to Ripperologist magazine as well, because it's a free subscription, isn't it? For yeah.
Yes, it's a free subscription. So the article which we've been talking today about an article which appears in edition 173, which is the escape routes. And in 174, which comes out in November, there's an article about the possible routes to Mitre Square.
And if you're watching this in 2026, it came out in November.
Of 2025, yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you, Steve. Great talking to you. Have a great remainder of your day. And until we meet again.
Certainly. Take care, Richard.